Hey, welcome back to the About the Labor podcast here at VikingsTerritory.com. I am BJ Reidell, back here with my guy, Drew Mahowald, and today we're talking about the 12-3 Minnesota Vikings, the first shutout since 1993, and of course it comes over the Packers, which is just gravy to me. So, going to be a quick show today. Drew and I have had some scheduling issues and things going on and whatnot. I'm sure a lot of you guys can understand to a degree with the Christmas holiday and that kind of thing, and Drew being down in Florida and whatnot, and myself having trouble waking up at 7 in the morning after going out. So, apologize for that. Thank you guys for bearing with us. So we think we got a great show for you. Let's jump right into it. It's going to be a relatively quick one here. Starting off with a note from our sponsor, as always. This is Can Wonderland and Black Stack Brewing once again. Can Wonderland is a one-of-a-kind Twin Cities experience. Pack up the kids and check out the coolest indoor mini golf course in Minnesota. Don't worry, there are plenty of creative cocktails and artisan pizza for the adults. Don't forget to stop by Black Stack Brewing upstairs for a couple beers after mini golf. Can Wonderland, Black Stack Brewing, two spots that make Twin Cities best cities on earth. And for all of you guys, for any of you guys that came out to the watch party, whether you approached me or not, we appreciate it. It was a massive success on our end. The owner was very satisfied, and we have the opportunity now to do some more fun stuff because of that type of thing. So we appreciate you guys for all of that. And just keep in mind that literally this mini golf course down at Can is quite literally attached to Black Stack Brewing. So it's like an all-in-one fun area. So it's a really cool space. Make sure to check that out if you haven't already. So let's jump right into this now, starting with the quarterback as always. Case Keenum, the numbers are okay. The performance was, in my opinion, a little bit mediocre. The scoreboard ultimately is all that matters, of course.
Right.
But I saw a relatively uneven performance. A couple missed shots downfield, specifically Adam Thielen, and then an underthrow to Stephon Diggs that he did come back and get a pass interference penalty on. But as far as I'm concerned, this was not a strong performance from Case Keenum, and it's probably a good example of why people still talk about potentially replacing the quarterback.
Well, yeah, I mean, I think I was mostly worried about the cold weather with Case Keenum because there was, the story leading up was, he hadn't played in below freezing temperatures his entire career. Growing up down south, playing for Houston, playing for the Texans and the Rams. Both either warm climate teams or an indoor stadium. So he didn't have to play outside, and he didn't have to play outside. Well, I should say didn't have to play outside. He didn't have to play outside in cold weather. So this was his first test for that, and it didn't look like he was comfortable straight up. And a lot of those deep throws were. I mean, on the bright side, most of them were overthrown, which is better than being underthrown for the most part. But I think there's some concerns there if the Vikings do end up going to Philadelphia for a playoff game where it's going to be cold, and the same type of conditions will take place in Philadelphia in January. So that's something that's on the offensive side of the ball I took away from this game. Specifically like when it pertains to Keenum is the weather conditions and kind of I do think that. Maybe he's just getting himself comfortable with it. Maybe he'll be better next game now that he knows what to expect. But that's something that I will worry about if the Vikings do have to play in Philadelphia in the playoffs.
That's an excellent point that I think you just made right there, honestly, because, you look at – I think this year is the perfect example of why situation is so important, right? Because we've seen Case Keenum take off in Minnesota with a lot of surrounding parts. We've seen Jared Goff take off with a better coaching staff, and we've seen Dak Prescott regress without – Ezekiel Elliott in his backfield, his offensive line having injury issues and all that kind of stuff. So I've personally learned a lot from this specific season. And I don't think that's an attention to detail thing. I just think that this season in particular is a great example of how to overcome injuries, how to overcome bad coaching, how to overcome a lot of different things. And sometimes that just means replacing the guy that's the weakest link. And sometimes that's the coach. Sometimes that's the weather, which is the important point that you're making here. Playing in the cold is hard. Straight up. Like when these coaches, they go to, pro days and stuff like that, they look at stuff like that. They look at, for example, Teddy Bridgewater wears gloves. I know you guys don't want to hear about Teddy Bridgewater when Case Keenum's playing well, but we got to use him as an example here. Teddy Bridgewater wears gloves and can throw the ball well with gloves. Now, if you've ever worn gloves before, I imagine most of you have, it's considerably warmer in your hands. Makes the ball in theory, easier to throw. So Case Keenum, on the other hand, does not wear gloves. That's just that's a personal choice by him. I'm not saying it's the wrong thing to do. I'm simply pointing out some context here for you guys, that when you're playing in negative degree weather, mobile quarterbacks are going to have more success.
For what it's worth, Teddy has been historically good in December. Looking back at his numbers, both 2014 and 2015.
I wrote an article about that specifically for the
That's right, you did, yeah.
Yeah, yep. I mean, it's not like there are like cold weather quarterbacks. That's a thing. That's a real thing, because it's not necessarily, this isn't to say that Keenum can't get better. Like, I mean, maybe this was just a learning experience, like you just said. But it is to say that he did not play his best football in a cold weather situation. And maybe, just maybe, that was part of the problem for him last night in terms of throwing deep balls where you need to be critically accurate. And, you know.
And for what it's worth, I do think it was a problem with Brett Hundley as well. I think this was probably the coldest game he's ever played in, even up playing in Lambeau. Right. I think it's the same thing with him. And he's been at UCLA and he's been at Green Bay. He hasn't had to play. I mean, he's been in the weather before, but he hasn't had to play in it. And I'm sure that factored into his play as well, which, I will give him some slack for the drops that his receivers had, but I thought he, for the most part, was pretty inaccurate. But yeah, Keenum, I'm mostly I kind of want to avoid a trip to Philadelphia in the playoffs, so that would mean Philadelphia losing in that first round, or the divisional round, I guess. But because if the Vikings do have to go there, I will be slightly concerned about that aspect of Keenum's game and how it will translate. Or I'll just be hoping for a warmer than average weather day, I guess, for that game. Because I don't think if it's a single digit temperatures for that game, I would feel a lot less confident about this offense than I would if it was indoors at US Bank, or if it was even warmer in Philadelphia and say in the 30s or something like that.
Absolutely, absolutely. The situation is just so important. That's really that's the point to hammer home here. Yeah. I think that's that's the thing to really take away here. Not to say that there are going to be people who just inherently are going to say Case Keenum sucks because he had a uneven performance. But once again, he made the throws when he needed to make the throws for the most part. I thought that Adam Thielen miss down the sideline over the top, the left sideline that is.
Yeah.
That was a, quote, bad miss because Thielen was so open. But like you said, if you're going to miss in a place where the cornerback can't get the ball.
Yeah.
So
that's where Hundley was missing too. That's actually a note Collinsworth made during the broadcast, that he was missing long on those deep ones. And it is better to miss long than short, because short gives the DBs the opportunity to make a play on that. So
absolutely. I mean, that's important. And for what it's worth, I thought Hundley made a couple of poor decisions, probably maybe underestimating the cold. Think about he threw the ball long on 4th and 7 and 4th and 10, two separate times. I get that he sees one-on-one coverage, and that's why he's throwing that football. That makes sense to me. But I think that, like you said, the cold might have been affecting his accuracy downfield, which is something that happens with cold weather quarterbacks, and that's a reason why we respect Brett Favre so much for playing in Lambeau for all those years and throwing bullets, and then also his receivers. That's how you know his receivers were successful, because he was throwing however many miles per hour. I don't know, but he was throwing the ball hard, and it's not easy to catch in the cold weather either. So, and like you said with Hundley, I mean, maybe these Packers receivers were also having issues with that type of thing as well.
That's true.
From there, let's talk a little bit about Stephon Diggs, Adam Thielen, the receiving core, just the running backs in general. Again, not the best offensive performance. And maybe the cold, again, was a factor here for some of these guys. Latavius Murray obviously spent most of his career in Oakland. Jerick McKinnon has spent, he's from Atlanta originally. I thought each of them had some good runs, maybe not great runs, but some, good, solid runs that, got some chunk yardage for the Vikings. And I thought that Stephon Diggs played very well. He's from Maryland, a relatively cold place. So maybe there is a theme going on here. But what did you see from, I guess, the skill players in the Vikings offense last night?
Well, I thought Jerick McKinnon should have played more, for sure. I thought he should have gotten more touches. He was hot, I think, early in this game. Yes. He had, I believe, over 6 yards of carry running the football. I thought he was way more effective, and that kind of the outside running game was way more effective than Murray for the most part during the game. But I do think that Pat Shurmur intentionally called this game very conservatively just because of the way the Vikings defense was playing. I do think that he kind of made this game easier on the Vikings offense, played it conservative, tried to avoid those mistakes, avoid the turnovers, which they did not have. So I, to some degree, I'm concerned about the efficiency, I guess, but at the same time, I'm not that worried because I do think they were just playing against the clock more so than playing against the Packers as this game wore on. So, I'm not too worried about this performance from the skill positions and from the offensive line too. We'll get into that shortly. But I'm going to add because, I'm going to be cocky about this, and I said I was going to do this on Twitter, and I did, but Adam Thielen did surpass 1,200 receiving yards. I tweeted out my video of myself predicting that before the season on the Vikings Territory Roundtable. So I'm going to be a little bit cocky and, boast a little bit that I did get that correct before the season. And I remember your face specifically when I predicted that on the show. You kind of gave this weird, are you kidding me? What are you talking about? But, hey. I'll take it. A blind squirrel finds a nut every once in a while. This is my nut, and I am the blind squirrel this time. So, but yeah, overall, I thought there's nothing really negative to be taken away here because I thought Shermer just called this game conservatively on purpose.
Right, and we keep talking. I feel like cold weather is going to become the theme of this episode, to be honest with you, because you look at the situation, and it's generally going to favor the defense. Well, I suppose not obviously, but generally speaking, that's what people talk about quite a bit, is that cold weather always favors the defense because they need to get their hand on the ball to get the ball away from the offense, not catch the ball and then move with it, right?
Yeah.
That's just the situation at hand. So you look at, the way that the Vikings approach this game, and this is again, is it obvious at this point that Zimmer is a defense-first coach? I think so.
I would hope so.
I would hope so. I think that, when you are a defense-first team and you're thinking we're trying to win with defense anyways, it makes a lot of sense to have good special teams to complement them. I thought Ryan Quigley played well. Kai Forbath handled the situation well, in my opinion. So you look at this situation, and it really set up well for the Vikings to get that first shutout since 1993. The offense was good enough. The defense was absolutely elite, something that we'll probably spend the majority of this show talking about. And the special teams was good enough. I thought it was extremely impressive that, David Morgan, a guy who probably doesn't snap all that much throughout the week, was getting good snaps off in punting situations where the Vikings needed to play field position a lot in this game in order to control the scoreboard and control the clock and all those types of things. I thought that was very important, and I thought that they did a heck of a job managing this game and preparing for the exact situation. They clearly knew that this was going to be a cold weather game, and they played like that. You look at the way that I guess we could just straight up jump into defense here unless you have anything to add on that front.
No, I think we're good there on the offense. We got a lot of questions about the offensive line and the Twitter questions, so we'll get to those when that comes up.
Excellent. Okay, so on the defensive side of the football now, this is in my opinion one of the greatest defensive performances that we've seen in a really long time from the Vikings because it was so complete from top to bottom. You look at how well each level played as a team, right? Linval Joseph was outstanding once again. Tom Johnson was doing his thing when he was in there. Everson Griffin and Danielle Hunter getting pressure all day. Harrison Smith, I think that he's probably the emphasis of this show.
Yes.
Xavier Rhodes was locked down. Trey Waynes had one of his better performances, at least from a statistical standpoint, if that's, again, what you look for in how you evaluate a player's performance. Anthony Barr and Eric Kendricks did their thing, coming up making tackles. I thought that this was a very, very, very complete defensive performance, and the offense catered to what they were doing, playing field position, not making stupid mistakes. And you think about the biggest plays that Green Bay had, the very biggest ones. They were two big plays that Green Bay had.
Brad Hundley
scrambling on broken plays, stuff you cannot prepare for, you have to adapt to on the fly. So this, in my opinion, was about as perfect of a defensive performance as you're going to see in the NFL today with all the new concepts, new scheming, and stuff that you have to adapt to. I thought Mike McCarthy gave it a good shot, but I thought the Vikings were simply the better team, and that's kind of what we expected going into this matchup.
Yeah, this defense, we know what it can do. We kind of expected, we expected it to kind of be a low-scoring game, at least for the Packers, because of Brett Hundley and not having Aaron Rodgers then, and they were missing another couple guys as well. But we mentioned on the primer that Hundley, is actually gets a whole week to prepare for the Vikings, whereas last time he was just kind of thrust in there with a game plan that was built for Aaron Rodgers. This time around, you have a full game plan set for Hundley, and they're at home. And it's just the Vikings went out there and had an answer for everything they tried, besides, again, those scramble plays. But Harrison Smith was absolutely phenomenal. He just straight up trolling all the Pro Bowl voters that did not put him in. 99.9 PFF grade.
Trolling.
Literally as perfect as you can get, I'm pretty sure, because they don't give hundreds, I don't think.
I've never seen one, so
that's literally the perfect game from Pro Football Focus. And for what it's worth, he did allow 3 catches, so that just shows you how Pro Football Focus will allow for mistakes, because defensive backs are supposed to give up catches, like it's inherent to the position. But Harrison Smith was so dominant in every other aspect outside of those 3 plays that he earned the 99.9 grade. And I thought, and you had Anthony Barr flying around making plays. I thought he was really good. I thought Linval Joseph was really good at containing the run. When Jamal Williams would get cooking a little bit, he kind of stepped in there to stop it. Trey Waynes had a heck of a game. Mackenzie Alexander had a heck of a game. The one guy really that didn't make an impact that I'm thinking of right now is Everson Griffin, because David Bakhtiari locked him down hard on that side, but it didn't seem to really have too much of a negative impact for the Vikings, because the rest of the team was dominating dominating the rest of the field, that the Packers couldn't really make any moves that were successful. So this is a flat-out dominant performance. Mike Zimmer has figured out the Packers, whether it's Aaron Rodgers or whether it's Brett Hundley, a quarterback, whatever it is. He has figured out the Green Bay Packers, at least the scheme that Mike McCarthy runs. Yeah. Now, Aaron Rodgers leaves some wiggle room there, but the numbers I saw, I think it was Krauserific on Twitter that posted the stats of the Vikings Packers scoring prior to Mike Zimmer and then after Mike Zimmer, and it's a night and day difference. So Mike Zimmer has figured out this Packers team. He has clued into them over these last few years, knowing that they have been the rulers of this division for the last several years, and he has keyed in on them, and it seems to have been working, again, regardless of who was that quarterback. Because I think if Rodgers had played quarterback in this game, it might have been closer, but I think this defense was dominant enough to keep the Packers low scoring, because I think the Vikings had an answer for everything. Yeah,
and that's really important. Straight up, that's a very important factor. And just you wrote the article last week on your Skull Scale about the turning point, and maybe that Aaron Rodgers getting injured was the turning point.
Yeah,
I'm starting to think that maybe the turning point in this division, maybe the definitive moment was that injury, but maybe the turning point was really 2015 when Zimmer was starting to adjust and learning on the fly and becoming how great it, learning all the things about this division that he needed to know in order to beat these very good head coaches. I got
a response from that from Adam West on Twitter at AWestE1, and he was saying, why are we dismissing 2015 so quickly as the turning point of the division? And my simple answer was, well, the Packers won a playoff game that year, so they kind of, still maintained the top spot, I guess, for me. But I can definitely see where, at least you could start to see the division sort of flip. And 2017, now you're kind of seeing finally the Vikings kind of maintaining a top spot while the rest of the division's out of the playoffs. Now, whether Rodgers comes back next year, we don't know. They're, by the way, that whole story about his release or whatever, the IR thing, is hilarious to me. But the point here, Vikings defense, Mike Zimmer, they seem to have figured out this Packers offense for the most part. When guys are, defending who they're supposed to defend, shout out to Terrence Newman in week 16 of last year. But when guys are doing what the coaching staff appears to be telling them to do, seems like this Vikings defense has control of what the Packers are trying to do.
And honestly, it seems like, again, we go even back to the Carolina loss. When the Vikings are in control of their emotions and in control of what they can control, they're a dominant football team. When they know, when they're aware of the situation, when everyone's thinking on the same page, which is critical. Again, I think we've learned that more than ever this year, that situation and everyone working towards the same goal, even if you disagree or you don't like the coach or you don't like your teammates or whatever it is, when you're all on the same page, that's when great things start to click. And that's, I started personally, it took me until, was it Atlanta when I guess my optimism went through the roof. It took me 10 weeks to start buying, like really, really buying this team. And to a degree, like I'm cool with that. Like sometimes it takes time to see enough to really feel comfortable. But at this point, I see this team as the dominant NFC team. Now, like Drew said earlier, do we want to go to Philadelphia and play in that cold weather and, have that situation at hand? Probably not. Now, do we think – I don't want to speak for you, but do I think that the Vikings can absolutely go in there and get it done if they can control their emotions? Yeah. This is why I give Stephon Diggs such a hard time with the being overly passionate thing. As someone who is also a loudmouth – or excuse me, he's not a loudmouth. As someone who is a loudmouth and is passionate and, doesn't always control their energy the best way – I see Stephon Diggs, and I'm like, dude, you're having a hell of a game. The Vikings are winning by 2 scores. There's just no reason to get that stupid penalty. And, we gave Anthony Barr crap for this against Carolina. A lot of young guys, they like, from what I've seen as someone who feels this way, they like being told exactly what to do. So guys like Zimmer work super well because they literally will be straightforward. They'll be forthright with you and say, hey, Stephon, like you're having a hell of a game, man. You're playing super well, and I know that you're jacked about that, but like we can't have that 15-yard taunting penalty. So just don't give them a reason, Like it's okay to celebrate. Like I'm all about celebrating. That's one of my favorite parts about this season in general is that teams are creating unity in the locker. I mean, think about the Juju Smith-Schuster, Antonio Brown, Martavis Bryant situation.
Yeah.
Those guys are all cool now because Martavis Bryant was able to basically feel more invested in the success of this team by celebrating with his friends and made him feel like he was more part of the team, and now we see him having more success in the field, I think. Sometimes a little bit of encouragement goes a long way, and sometimes that encouragement comes from just guys being like, hey, I want to celebrate with you when I score this touchdown. I think that really matters here, and it brings out the heart and the fire of these players. But at the same time, it's important to, don't let the Packers get into your head. That's when you're losing, the best thing you can do is get into the other team's head. And that's what Tom Brady does better than everyone, by the way.
That's true.
So
that's true.
That's the best thing to get them off their game because that's all you can do to stop a team that's playing well. The only way you can stop them is to get them off their game, off of their agenda, off of their play calling, whatever it is, and the best way to do that.
For what it's worth, that's what the Panthers did to the Vikings early in that game with the Jonathan Stewart long run, and that's exactly how the Vikings were thrown off, and they were forced to come from behind, which they hadn't done for essentially the whole year.
Right.
And for what it's worth, they made it close, but in the end, the Panthers pulled away. So
penalties and third down conversions and extended drives. I know people have been harping on this for a very long time, but it's critically important to hold that stuff in check. You literally can see teams like Oakland, Cincinnati fall apart due to just dysfunctional atmosphere. Cleveland, a dysfunctional atmosphere is the death of a lot of teams, and that is what, in my opinion, what Mike Zimmer has done so well, what Doug Peterson has done so well, what Sean Payton has done so well is take negative situations and find a way, just whether it's a tiny thing or a huge thing, find a way to find a positive, to encourage your players, but also maintain that hard-nosed mentality, the authority figure mentality. That's why Mike Zimmer is head coach of the year, in my personal opinion. So unless you have anything to add on all of these guys, again, very complete performance overall. Harrison Smith is the star here, no doubt.
For sure.
But you got anything else to add on the defensive side of the ball?
I don't. I think Danielle Hunter played really well, even though it won't really show up. But I thought he played really well when he was in there. Brian Robinson got in there a few times and made Hundley. I saw he had like 23 pressured or something times. Hundley was pressured that many times. But only sacked once. So that shows me that the Vikings were really getting close outside of Everson Griffin, because Everson Griffin was just stonewalled the entire game from Bakhtiari, but everybody else was getting close. So I think that pass rush, it might not have had the numbers. I think the only sack was actually Trey Waynes on some broken play. But I thought the pass rush was there. It just didn't quite get the numbers, the sacks, the et cetera, that we're accustomed to seeing, but it definitely affected the game. So that's the last thing I'll say before we move into some questions from Twitter here. We do have a few here, so I'll get to them first. From Bubcut at Bubcut2K5, he actually sent us 2 tweets here. How much does this cold air really affect the offense? I'm really hoping a lot, because offensively this is kind of ugly for the Vikings. And then he added, I'm convinced that Shurmur should just tell the offense go play schoolyard football, because Keenum seems much more effective when winging it. So, what do you got for those 2 comments there?
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that for me just one more time? I apologize. I was looking at a different question. Sorry.
The second one.
Yeah.
The second one, he just said that he's convinced Shurmur to just tell the offense to go play schoolyard football, because it seems like Keenum is more effective when winging it. And I think he's referring to the David Morgan play that went for 20-something yards.
Yeah.
When he went towards the line of scrimmage and backwards and threw it. That was a pretty sick play. That's what Keenum has done so well all year. But what do you think about the offense in general, I guess, in the cold weather and, Pat Shurmur and Case Keenum's improvisation?
Yeah, I mean, the play that you just mentioned with David Morgan and Case Keenum, we threw, like, when we were at the watch party down at Blackstack, I was sitting with a couple of my buddies, and all of us were just like, let's go, it was really exciting, because, like, you love seeing a guy like David Morgan shut people up when they say he's not athletic enough to do stuff like that. So I personally really loved that moment. I thought it was a lot of fun. And like you said, with the improvisation and with the cold weather and all those things, like Case Keenum had to do a lot to get himself into a situation where he could even throw that football. And people dismiss that. Maybe that's because they're watching downfield to see how the stuff develops, or maybe it's because they just aren't familiar with how difficult it is to manipulate the pocket the way he did on that particular play. But that was an incredible play, and that was an incredible first down. It was 2 great individual efforts, both Keenum and David Morgan.
Morgan was not running a route on that play. I think he just kind of –
he leaked out.
He and Keenum were kind of on the same page mentally there, just kind of, okay, you go down the field because nobody's defending you, or nobody's assigned to you. Right. Because you're blocking, so go down the field, and that's what it's something mentally there. They signaled to each other or whatever, and it worked. That's good chemistry.
Absolutely.
Keenum is definitely building rapport with his receivers. So, but yeah, I'd also add that he asked about the cold weather, and I do think it did affect this offense quite a bit. But I think a lot of it too had to do with Pat Shurmur's play calling and keeping things conservative. But I think the accuracy of Keenum is what was thrown off by the cold, and I will be concerned about that aspect of his game. In the event of I guess it would be an NFC Championship game at Philadelphia. So
I'm with you there.
Next one here, right? Yeah, the next one here from our buddy Robert at Gardner40. Robert, he did win a T-shirt from us, I believe, a month ago or so. He's asking, where is McKinnon tonight? Why have we not used him for runs toward the sideline with his speed? Maybe it's the condition of the field, or what are our thoughts on that? So we got a response that someone responded to that question and said, what I've seen from the Vikings, they have no idea how to use him. He's clearly more efficient when given the opportunity. It falls on the organization and the coach. So, do you agree with that?
I don't agree with the second statement. Do I get frustrated with Pat Shurmur sometimes with his lack of usage for some players? Yeah, absolutely. I was with you on your statement that you made earlier that I think McKinnon probably should have been used more. And I'm with you in the idea that I think that he's really building a nice resume for the offseason and earning himself.
You did tweet that yesterday, which I agree with. That he's going to make himself a lot of money. He might not be able to be retained for another season
unless you were to hypothetically release Latavius Murray, which is why the Vikings set that contract up the way that they did. By the way, I think that Shurmur knows how to use Jerick McKinnon well. I've seen him split out wide a number of different times. I think that that's one of his strengths, just simply being in space. I think the amount of usage is the thing that Shurmur struggles with here. I think he clearly knows how to get him the ball and have him be effective in space. I just think he's still trying to figure out how many snaps to give this guy. Because, you think about the usage for McKinnon this week versus, like, Laquan Treadwell and Michael Floyd, who both got a couple of targets apiece. This was a cold weather game, so in theory, it wouldn't make a whole lot of sense to use McKinnon a lot in that way when you can use receivers who have strong hands. I mean, you can only have 11 guys on the field, guys. And I know that the Vikings have a ton of playmakers and a lot of guys that can do a lot of things well. But if you're Pat Shurmur, you've got a split second to get your personnel out there, and you're trying to put your team in the best situation. And did he fail at that a couple of times this past week? For sure. But does he do that every week? Does every play caller fail in that regard every week?
Right.
For the most part. I mean, there's always going to be a but-if type thing. But, relative to the situation, I think he could have used McKinnon more, but I don't think that this was a poor performance by Pat Shurmur by any means.
Yeah, I mean, I agree. I just think that the Vikings and Shurmur have fallen in love with Murray as a bell cow, a guy who runs in between the tackles and can turn up yards that way. But I really think McKinnon should be mixed in a little bit more because his change of pace is effective. He runs outside very well. And I think they've fallen in love with Murray, even though his yards per carry is right around, I don't know what it is for the season, but it seems like a lot of games he's at 20 carries for 70 yards or something like that, when it seems like McKinnon's got more of that explosive big play potential, and I think they should take advantage of that. But let's see here from Bob Mark 76. He asked about the cold and the weather and how much that affects. We kind of answered that already. So our last question here then is from Chase at Chase Skoll. Should we start to worry about these offensive line injuries because Nick Easton's out for the season now with a broken ankle, and Riley Reef left the game early. So are you worried about these injuries because now your boy Jeremiah Searles is inserted into the starting lineup? So how do you feel about that?
Well, I just want to say that I was talking about 2 weeks ago about how if Jeremiah Searles needs to step up, that he'll be prepared to do so, and I hold true to that. So I'm going to be straight. I'm going to be 100% straight with you guys. I think that Nick Easton is the weakest link on this offense right now. And this isn't to say that he is.
This is all 11 guys. You think all 11 guys he's the weakest link?
Correct. And it's not necessarily that I think, people always take that type of statement as a personal attack. I think Nick Easton's a good guy. I've never heard anything negative about him, but he hasn't been playing well. Pro Football Focus also shares my thinking on this. He has the worst grade of any Vikings player right now among players who have played 400 snaps or something like that, 500 snaps, I think. So with Easton, I think that him being injured, it obviously sucks. You never want to see someone get hurt. It puts him in a poor position to resume his career when he becomes healthy, anytime that type of thing happens. But I do think he works hard. I think that he does his best. You take that for what you will.
I thought he was pretty solid in pass protection for the most part this season, but the run blocking, I thought was the big concern for him.
Right, and so I'm not that concerned about that injury in terms of how it affects the Vikings moving forward. I think that I'm okay with Searles being slotted in at guard because his problems have always been at tackle. So I've always been someone that is interested in seeing Searles play on the interior just because maybe his athleticism translates.
I think that's naturally his position is guard. So he's been thrust outside. I mean, most of last season he was at right tackle and he probably shouldn't have been. So maybe this is his natural position. Maybe this is where he'll find his calling in the NFL.
And I think we're also seeing Tony Sperano making a lot of headway in his second year as the offensive line guy. He's really getting through to these guys. I've heard a lot of just hilarious stuff about what Tony Sperano does to get people to buy into what he's teaching. And when they buy into Sperano, who is a madman, just for the record,
and he's got the highest. He's like a fat chihuahua. He's like his voice is so high pitched and loud. No, but you heard it at training camp, right? We were both there for the offensive line drill, right? 2 feet away from him. He's just
he was getting down low, really low, and he was on the players eye level, and he was no, yes, good.
No, high pitched. It's just, and my favorite part too is I can kind of imagine that because you see when Thielen Diggs, whoever it is, has a long catch down the sideline, he runs up and smacks him on the butt, and you can just hear that high pitched voice. You can just hear it.
He's a rah-rah coach, so he's one of those dudes who I think people respond to well when you're playing well, because then they're like, wow, this is working. But he's not an authoritative figure, so that's why I don't think he does well as a head coach, but as a position coach,
that's maybe also why things didn't go well last year, is because there's always injuries. These guys that didn't play their positions they were made to play, and
Yeah. You got to buy in, man. You got to buy in, and I think that Sperano's done a great job with that. So it sucks that Easton got hurt, but I trust Searles to step up. And I shouldn't say I trust, but I believe that he will if necessary.
Any concern about Riley Reef? Because I think he left early, but it didn't seem like it was anything too serious. Rashad Hill.
I think that was I would guess that was probably a precautionary thing for him.
Yeah.
Just because I think that the Vikings are thinking long term right now, and by long term, it's also kind of the short term. They know that they now have in a position where they can rest their starters for 2 weeks, and I think Riley Reef. That was just a thing where they could pull Riley Reef. And give him just extra time and not try to re-aggravate whatever issues he is having.
Yeah, I think this was a game where you saw, the Vikings were extremely healthy going into this game. And I think, once they felt that they had this game in hand, I think that's when Riley Reef went out of the game. I think it was either late third quarter or early fourth quarter when he went out of the game. So yeah, I agree. They're playing things safe. They're knowing that, when they're keeping things, they're playing it safe for Riley Reef so that he can, they can comfortably win games, but still keep their guys that are kind of borderline healthy, just kind of healthy enough to play, but not healthy enough to practice.
Right. Keeping
those guys well enough so that they can last through the postseason. So
absolutely.
That was our last question, but I will add one more here. Do you have a game ball to present? And I kind of think I know who it's going to be.
Harrison Smith.
Yeah.
That's game over for me. He was the best player.
I'm gonna do someone different because I like him. It's David Morgan, and I think he got the game ball from Coach Zimmer. So the
long snapping thing was incredible.
Yeah, exactly. The long snapping thing.
I was literally when I was at the bar or at Black Stack, it's technically a brewery, obviously, but I was sitting there and I was sitting there next to my buddy who played long snapper at Wisconsin, who was the perfect person for me to be sitting next to that moment. So he's sitting there. And he looks over at me and he was like, dude, I don't know how Morgan's going to do on the snap. And I looked back and I was like, dude, is it even that big of a deal? And he was almost I could see it in his face. He's one of the nicest dudes ever.
That's probably a big shot to the ego of long snappers. What little ego they have, probably a big shot.
And honestly, it was an ignorance thing for me. I just didn't realize how infrequently long snappers tend to prepare, backup long snappers, because this is what he told me about his personal experience, was that the backup long snapper, for the most part, especially on a 53-man roster, not an expanded college roster, is going to take maybe 5 long snaps per week. So, you prepare yourself for the situation, but you're not doing it on a day-to-day basis. So I just remember his reaction. He looked at me, and one of my other buddies was like, hey, you better tread lightly. It's again, this guy is the nicest person I know, one of the most competitive people ever, but he just was I could just see it in his eyes. He was like, all right, I think you're wrong about this one, man. And I was wrong. And I get that. For the game ball purposes, that's a good pick. Before we close this thing out, though, real quick, I do want to get to a couple of questions from our guy Daryl Stofferin, who has he sent me a couple through direct message on Twitter, and I just don't want to skip over these once again. First of all, the first thing he asked was a couple days ago. He said after the Pro Bowl situation, he was asking, basically saying, is there a problem with Linval Joseph and Harrison Smith being not in the Pro Bowl from the standpoint that they're literally the best at their position? So he was asking, where do these guys rank in terms of their position? That's the first thing he mentioned. And so for me, Harrison Smith is very clearly the best safety in the NFL. So that is horrific. That's the worst. That's one of the worst mistakes that the NFL has made this entire season. And then for Linval Joseph, I think you can make an argument for 2 or 3 other guys. Brandon Williams is a dude that I know that Arif Hassan really likes. He does a heck of a job in Baltimore. I don't personally believe he's any better than Linval Joseph, but again, scheme is important here as well. So I think there's definitely an argument for Linval Joseph being the best nose tackle in a 4-3 scheme. So does he deserve to be in the Pro Bowl, and is it egregious that both of those guys were left out? Absolutely. Your take on that?
Yeah, I would put. The way I think Pro Bowl voting works is they don't vote on nose tackles. They vote on I think they just vote on interior linemen, I believe. But so that's probably part of the reason Linval didn't get voted in, was just because of the way it's voted, and the nose tackle position isn't really recognized by the Pro Bowl voters, but Harrison Smith is definitively the best safety in the league, in my opinion. Chris Collinsworth said it like 19 times last night during the broadcast that, Smith will make a play, and he's like, this is why Harrison Smith is the best safety in the NFL. And, it's unbelievable he wasn't voted in the Pro Bowl. But I love that he literally got a perfect PFF grade. It was the game after the Pro Bowl.
How Harrison Smith is that, by the way?
It's very good. He's not going to say a word about it.
He's going to let his play do his talking.
That's probably one of the reasons he didn't make it, is just his low marketability. But
and then the other thing that Daryl asked, this is more of a fun question. It seems like from reading this, it sounds like a relatively sarcastic statement that he's making. He said, so after watching the game, I wonder how many people are wanting to change their vote for Harrison Smith. And this is something that we've obviously been harping on quite a bit here.
All of them. All
of them. Again, this is something that the NFL really screwed up. And like you just mentioned, it is part of the process of selecting players to the Pro Bowl. That's part of the issue here. Not necessarily. The
Pro Bowl itself is a joke, and I think we should probably, to some degree, we should stop giving it so much recognition and attention. But it's bad. People get bonuses for this. Like there's incentives for this. There are extra money, financial bonuses players get for this. And I'm looking at Harrison Smith's season PFF grade right now, 98.0. It's 98.0, his season PFF grade, and he's not in the Pro Bowl. And that's far and away the best safety. It's a joke. I hope those voters are now regretting it after seeing what, on national TV, the 2 interceptions, all the plays, tackles behind the line of scrimmage, other pass deflections. I really hope they're regretting their vote now.
The perfect game. It was, I've been, as of late, when we do the show notes, I draw a picture of who I personally believe was the player of the game. And so during the last show that we did, it was when we're doing a show, when we're not talking about a specific game, I draw a picture of a player that was kind of the focal point of the topic. Mm-hmm. And so I drew a picture of Harrison Smith, and that was what we were talking about on the Pro Bowl. And I tried to change it up a little bit every single time, but I just drew another picture of Harrison Smith because there's no David Morgan is a great answer to that was honestly, you couldn't have given a better answer in my opinion to rebuttal what I said. But I think everyone here can agree, listeners, people on Twitter, wherever you're getting your information from, that was one of the most dominant safety efforts.
Hilarious to me. Harrison Smith's PFF grade is 98.0. That's
not a Pro Bowler.
It's almost a perfect season.
# not a Pro Bowler. So I believe that's all we got, right? I
think so. I think that's all we got.
Excellent. So that is the end of the About the Labor podcast for today. Make sure to check us out on iTunes, CastBox, Stitcher, YouTube, ZoneCoverage.com is where you can find, my work. VikingsTerritory.com is where you can find Drew's work. And yeah, we will be back after Christmas or talking more about the Vikings and the situation at hand, and we'll go from there. So thanks, as always, for all the Twitter questions and all the feedback that you guys give us on a regular basis. Make sure to check us out specifically on CastBox. That's our partner in crime right now. And yeah, thanks for being down at Blackstack. Thanks for checking out Can Wonderland and all the other sponsors that we bring up here. That really benefits our project here when you guys do that sort of thing. So we are appreciative. And so we'll be back later on this week. Happy holidays to you guys, to everyone. Merry Christmas to those of you who do celebrate Christmas. And have a great rest of your week. And we'll talk to you guys later on.